Why the U.S. Constitution has worked while others have failed. There is one central reason why the U.S. Constitution has worked while all others have been to varying degrees unsuccessful, and that is the idea that rights and powers belong first to the people, some of which are given to the government in order to govern. This belief of our founding fathers was faith-based, believing in a supreme creator who gave rights and powers unto the people, who then gave some, but not all, to the government. This unique ideology will be discussed later on. Today, I will explain several of the ingenious methods by which this ideology has been put into practice and maintained, but it all hangs on this point, that our founding fathers realized then strove to implement a system where the government was subservient to the people, and not the people to the government. In order to make my argument compelling, I would like to start out by very briefly talking about the Declaration of Independence, so that the ambient in which the Constitution was drafted can be understood. From there, I will take a step back more than 2,000 years to the first democracy, where we will see strong points, but also limitations thereof. Moving forward to 1787, three characteristics of the Constitution will be shown vital in maintaining this ideology. First, the three-branch system of checks and balances. Second, states' rights. And third, the amendment process. All three of these work to help unalienable rights and all other rights belonging to the people stay with those people. The brilliant design of Congress, outlined in Article 1 of the Constitution, and the emergence of a two-party political system have also been important in maintaining the order necessary to preserve rights. The seeds of independence, as well as divinely given rights of the people, began sprouting in the Declaration of Independence. One misconception that I would like to clear up is that the struggle for independence was fought almost entirely for economic gain. The great founding fathers, such as John Adams, were only trying to free themselves of trade tariffs to make more money, end quote. It is far more than that. As you read through the opening paragraphs of the Declaration, you feel a sense of duty. You feel a sense of seriousness, that same seriousness with which these men took war. Quote, "Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable." End quote. This does not sound like war-hungry or even greedy individuals looking to make a buck. According to the very document declaring war, they cite that it would be imprudent to go to war unless for a very necessary evil. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such a form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness." End quote. Further down, it explicitly defines their action not only as right, but as a duty. These men took very seriously the task at hand. Each were willing to die to stand against the status quo. Let's take a look at some of the infractions against their rights. This status quo. Speaking of the King of Great Britain, he, quote, "He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend them. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly." End quote. These first injustices have all been concerning legislation being done in the colonies, or lack thereof. Quote, "He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will." End quote. The king hadn't stopped with the legislation. He had also taken a negative toll on the justice system. It should be noted the order of these offenses. When making a list such as this, it is likely that some of the more important or influential grievances are to be listed first. I find it no coincidence that the first things on the list had to do with the making of laws. It is incredibly important in a functional government. It comes as no surprise that the Constitution, though written several years later, addresses not only these same problems, but in the order of importance. Article 1 of the Constitution outlines the legislative branch. It outlines the form that it will take, how to pass laws, and a time and place for their sessions. Articles 2 and 3 are solutions to an executive power being too powerful and judicial system not being powerful enough. It is clear that the Founding Fathers were acting on more than just financial gain desires. They were acting out of duty. They wouldn't have risked everything, absolutely everything, had it not been worth their very lives. The Declaration of Independence had a two-part plan. Quote, "It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security." End quote. Part 1 was a direct test of everything, putting a weak set of colonies against the largest superpower on earth. Once completed, they had an enormous intellectual feat ahead of them, providing a guard for the future. It is clear in the way that they framed the Constitution that the Founding Fathers kept in mind protecting these rights that were so valued and prized. Issues brought up in the Declaration like naturalization, taxation without representation, standing armies, and fair trials were all addressed in the Constitution. With these documents being born years apart, it is evident and obvious that greed did not motivate these good men, but a desire to change the world for the better. Perhaps others in the passing of years had thought or grasped out at this truth, that the powers of an institution are given to said institution by the people. It is possible that it had crossed the mind of someone somewhere. The thing about a truth is that it remains true regardless of whether it is believed or dismissed, appreciated or ignored. It still remains true. And the basis of both the Declaration and the Constitution is true. It's as true as the law of gravity. We are very fortunate indeed that our Founding Fathers realized this truth, fought for it, and then earnestly found a way to make this philosophical truth a reality. Believing the origins of human rights and governmental power, leaving the origins of human rights and governmental power to their proper places may not be exclusively to our country, but the specific way in which our country is guided and founded upon these principles makes us very singular indeed. I will now examine the setup of primitive democracy in Athens, Greece. I do this not only to show why our Founding Fathers couldn't have drafted a true democracy, but also to show a peculiar course of action taken. First, the rather odd but important actions of a Greek leader. In the 7th century BC, Athens was under tyrannical rule, in which landowners chose the ruler. Draco, known as the lawgiver, increased stability throughout the city-state by making a written law code. His successor, Solon, known as the father of democracy, was faced with a dilemma. Many of the farming class who owned property and therefore had the right to vote were passing through extremely difficult circumstances due to agricultural difficulties. They found themselves selling their property, even some of them selling themselves into slavery to escape their debts. Solon also noted that the merchant class was extremely influential and important in their trade-based economy, but because most of the merchants were not landowners, they had no political say. Solon believed that by involving more of the people, the city-state would actually be more powerful. The people would feel more tied in and needed. They would put forth more. He devised a system in which all free men could, to some extent, participate in the voting process. This is a very peculiar action. Though no one at this time realized that the power Solon had was given to him not just by the ruling families that appointed him, but by every citizen in Athens. The reason it was peculiar is because, perhaps for the first time in recorded history, a leader who had power in his hands was giving it to the people, was finding a way to spread that power. This is the spirit that set Solon and our Founding Fathers apart, the spirit putting off for themselves what rightly belongs to the people. Every citizen having the right to vote on every decision truly puts all the power back in their hands. No need to worry about what some king will do about foreign politics because I can go in and cast my personal vote. There are two major drawbacks behind this system: the logistical nightmare of gathering citizens together for voting, and the dynamic change of public opinion. Athens was able to maintain this form of government because it was small in nature. Can you imagine citizens traveling from all over the colonies in order to cast a vote? Far too big geographically, as well as the population of the colonies. There wouldn't have been room to hold them all. Disregarding the logistics, it was dangerous to have the masses voting directly on topics. 6 Athenian generals tasted the bitter truth of this when, after a battle, they were sentenced to death by majority rule of their own people. The saddest thing of this is they had actually won the battle. The masses need to maintain their rights and powers, but exercise them in a way that promotes responsibility. Representation was the solution that our founding fathers came up with. History is riddled with stories of men, good, bad, or otherwise, who have had too much power and, regardless of their initial intentions, were corrupted by their power. The Greeks that we have just discussed feared this. They were terrified of it. As a counter to this problem, their government officials served for only 1 year and were not elected nor appointed, but chosen by a lottery system. The idea was that no one could thirst after a position if it was given purely by chance. On a grading scale of good, better, and best, this comes in at good. After all, they avoid the problem, but there are drawbacks to it. Several obvious ones being in government positions that perhaps don't have the affinity for it or lack the necessary skills to accomplish the task at hand. Our founding fathers came up with a solution far better, known today as a 3-branch system of government. As mentioned earlier, the Constitution puts forth solutions to grievances related in the Declaration. All this problem solving would have been for naught had a power-hungry president later on down the road taken over. Their solution is far better because it provides a way to have candidates intentionally voted into office, but put them under parameters that won't allow for takeovers, misconduct, or playing outside the lines. Like setting up fences and nets around a batting cage, this system of checks and balances pulls everything back together. This part of the Constitution is so revolutionary in design, so complex and intricate, yet simple in theory, that it comes across as a work of genius. The ideology that rights and powers belong to the people first is the most important idea I can convey, explaining why our Constitution has been successful. The 3-branch system of government puts forth the why it has been, or the how it has been able to maintain this order. Stated simply, the ideology is the why, and the 3-branch system of government is one of the biggest factors in how our Constitution has been successful. Laws pass from Congress to President for ratification, where he can check the legislature with a veto. Congress can check him by passing laws over his veto, approving his budget and nominations, as well as impeachment. The Supreme Court can check both the legislative branch and the executive branch by declaring actions or laws unconstitutional, and can be checked in return by those branches who decide nominations and approve nominations to the Supreme Court. They are all dependent on each other and subject to each other. They must find a way to play nice in order to complete with their functions respectively. This system ensures that no one group gets too powerful, which could allow for the infringement of rights or powers of the people. A note I would like to make about the British form of government. Their Prime Minister is chosen from the majority group in Parliament. This is a major difference between the two forms of government. In ours, the legislative branch needs to be separate. Connected, yes, but separate from the executive branch, for they have different functions. Before moving on, I would like to point out the differences in the legislative bodies of our government compared to Great Britain. Congress is another feat of genius that I believe we as Americans take for granted. We get the best of both worlds. We have representatives of the House who are up for election every 2 years. This keeps them tied closely to their constituents. Because they are tied closer to the masses, they theoretically represent better those masses. Just as we saw with the Athenians, the masses can get carried away at times. Congress is checked within itself by the Senate, a group up for election every 6 years. Thus, they must still represent well their states, but it allows them some breathing space to make level-headed decisions. Compare that with Great Britain's House of Commons and Lords. The House of Commons has a term length of 5 years, while the House of Lords serve for life. This screams sitting duck. Gridlocking is very prominent in parliament-style governments. Perhaps the lengthy terms have something to do with that. With long terms or indefinite terms, the representatives don't feel a sense of urgency to act, or they will be voted out, the way that our House of Representatives does. Moving on to the next point, states' rights. The drafting and ratifying of the Constitution was a hard sell. From gaining independence to the ratifying of the Constitution, the states were a confederacy. Each state acted as a sovereign nation. In order to form this more perfect union, each of these colonies had to give up some of the power the people had given them. How would their leaders respond? There was opposition, as you can imagine, but compromises were made. Issues were worked through, and the Union was formed. The last amendment of the Bill of Rights reads, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved for the states respectively, or to the people." The states themselves needed to retain rights in order to make this new system work. Local government is a necessity. Thomas Jefferson and George Washington in particular could see how state government was closer to the people and therefore often better equipped to handle their needs. The Union we form today is far different from the Union that George Washington left. The national government has a far greater outreach and influence than they had in mind. That being said, it may be too much of an influence. It's possible that fear of an overpowering national government, George Washington in his political theory opted for an overly unimposing national government. With the national government slightly undersized, the pendulum swing of the nationalists led by Hamilton brought the national government into a happy medium. A crucial element of the Constitution is Article 5, putting forth the amendment process. Again, this is another how, supporting the why our Constitution has been successful. The Bill of Rights was crucial in getting the Constitution ratified and in protecting our rights. One truth is that though our founding fathers did their best, though they were good men, good God-fearing men, they made mistakes. For instance, in order to get the Constitution ratified, a compromise was made over slavery. In essence, to start this wonderful country under this inspired Constitution, a necessary evil was allowed in. Thanks to the amendment process, that error of slavery was taken care of. Thanks to the amendment process, African Americans can vote, women can vote, and many other errors have been clarified and cleared up. The amendment process makes this document more than a piece of old parchment. It is a living, breathing, and changing part of the United States that is adaptable to our needs. It's rigid enough to hold us when we need it, but flexible enough to go with us where we need to go. The emergence of a two-party system has also been important in protecting the basic ideology. Though this was not enumerated in the Constitution, it has come to be a factor in the way the Constitution is used. One reason that the two-party system is a protection to our unalienable rights is it pushes towards the middle. Outliers have a much harder time getting support and office with this two-party system in place. Some of America's population is not being representative, but theoretically the people as a whole will be more protected without these extremes. One stunting effect of the two-party system comes from gridlocking. When political lines are followed more than what the representatives feel are in the actual best interests of their represented problems arise. Luckily, even during recent gridlocks, subcommittees have been successful in getting things done. Throughout this message, my respect and admiration can be felt for our founding fathers. More than political systems, such as the three-party system, mixed democracy, or democratic republic, two-party system, and even an ingenious design for Congress, of far greater importance than any of these was the virtue that these men possessed. It is of far greater importance because perhaps there are other political systems or forms that could also work, but without the kind of men we had implementing our Constitution, it never would have worked. They had one goal, quote, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity," unquote. And they did not stray from that goal. I admire them for their creative genius in designing and drafting a completely new form of government, but more than that, I admire them for living true to the things they believed. They believed that there was a supreme creator. In God they trusted, and accordingly they acted. They acted doing good for the world, for them and their posterity, in an altruistic fashion. I don't want to romanticize these men nor claim their actions to be divine, but I certainly classify it as unnatural. Quote, "We have learned by sad experience that it is the nature and disposition of almost all men, as soon as they get a little authority, as they suppose, they will immediately begin to exercise unrighteous dominion." Unquote. The history books are riddled with Hitler, Stalins, and other men exercising unrighteous dominion, ruling with an iron fist and dominating. Few and far between are those who put the virtue and goodness, what is right, in front of what will benefit them. These men put off their natural man. They put things like greed behind them to secure blessings for their posterity. This ideology that powers and rights came from a creator, a God, given to the people, that the people give them to the government in exchange for services needed, for example, common defense. This is why our Constitution has been successful, and our great founding fathers are the how it came to work. They are what made it uniquely workable. Before closing, I would like to compare our country to two others. First, the recent fall of Egypt. Some have asked why this sort of democracy, the pseudo-democracy, didn't make it a year, while we have been going through thick and thin for over 200 years. Some point to the extremely difficult situation that Egypt found itself in shortly after its constitution came forth. I would remind all that when our constitutional convention was going on, the world powers of the time were waiting for us all to fail. We were immediately called upon to aid France in a war with England. The people were torn, some wanting to help England, others France. As quickly as the national government was formed, it nearly fell apart. The difference again was the great leadership and virtue of stalwart men. Now a comparison with Germany, modern-day Germany. To check our relative uniqueness, I decided to read the German Constitution. It is amazing to me how similar it is. It surprises me how many of the rights enumerated in our Constitution are found inked into theirs. One thing that puzzles me even more, though, is the order in which the German Constitution is laid out. Before explaining anything to do with the ruling body or structure of the government, they have what is equivalent to a large Bill of Rights. The even more puzzling thing about it is that some of these rights, such as freedom of the press and closely related freedom from censorship, are not being honored. I question how much these enumerated rights are words on paper and how many are real, everyday, dependable things that citizens can count on. Our country is different, not just for having a uniquely drafted constitution with true order of power, but that it actually applies in daily use. In closing, I would like to repeat a line from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." End quote. To be honest, I didn't hold these truths to be self-evident. I didn't realize how obvious they are. I now can see not only how clearly accessible these truths are, but how essential they are for me and those who come after me. Governments derive their power from the people. We live in a nation that internalizes this because we had founding fathers with character. God bless America.